The alien research station floated in the darkness of space like a dying firefly, its crystal towers catching the faint red light from the collapsing star nearby. Commander Xyloth stood at the main observation window, his three-fingered hands pressed against the cold glass as he watched the sensor screens flash, warning after warning. His purple skin had turned almost white with fear, something that happened to all Vareen when death came close. Behind him, the control room buzzed with panicked voices as his crew tried to find a way out of the nightmare that had found them. The Vareen had been peaceful for thousands of years. They built research stations and studied the universe, never bothering anyone, never taking what was not theirs. War was something they read about in history files, a relic from their primitive past. Their military was nothing more than a few old patrol ships that mostly escorted science vessels. They had no weapons that could fight a real enemy, no soldiers trained for battle, no plans for what to do when someone wanted to kill them. The Krathaks were different. They came from the dark edges of the galaxy where no light reached and no mercy existed. They moved from system to system like locusts, taking everything, destroying everyone. The Krathaks did not negotiate or trade or make peace. They simply consumed. 15 of their heavy cruisers now surrounded the station, each one bristling with weapons that could crack planets. 7 destroyers circled like sharks waiting for the kill. The Vareen had maybe an hour before their shields failed completely. Lieutenant Myra rushed to Xyloth's side, her chitinous armor clicking with each nervous movement. She was young, barely 2 cycles out of the academy, and this was supposed to be a routine assignment studying stellar collapse. Instead, it would be her grave. Everyone on the station knew it. 300 scientists and their families huddled in the lower levels, holding each other, saying goodbye. Some prayed to old gods that most Vareen had stopped believing in centuries ago. Others simply sat in silence, waiting for the end. Xyloth forced himself to turn away from the window and face his crew. He had to be strong for them, even though his legs shook and his heart hammered in his chest. A commander's duty did not end just because death was certain. He walked to the communications console where young Varric sat, his fingers dancing over the holographic controls as he tried to boost their signal strength. The boy was crying, tears running down his blue face, but he kept working. Xyloth put a hand on his shoulder. The transmission had to go out. Even if no one came to save them, someone needed to know what happened here. The Vareen had contributed so much to galactic knowledge over the millennia. Their discoveries in quantum physics had revolutionized faster than light travel. Their medical advances had saved billions across dozens of worlds. Their poetry and music had touched the souls of species that did not even breathe the same air. All of that could not just disappear into the void without anyone knowing. Varric looked up at him with desperate eyes. He had sent the distress call on every frequency known to their people, broadcast it to every major civilization within range. Nothing came back but silence. The great powers of the galaxy were too far away or too busy or too scared of the Krathaks to help. The Helian Empire with its vast fleets cared only for profit and saw no gain in fighting. The Sindarin Collective stayed locked behind their borders, ignoring everything outside. The Tellurian Alliance was ancient and powerful but moved slowly, debating every action for years before making a decision. Then Varric said something that made Xyloth pause. He mentioned a rumor, something he had heard from a trader who passed through their system months ago. There was a new species, newcomers to the galactic community who had only just discovered faster-than-light travel a few decades back. Humans, they called themselves. They had established a small embassy in the Andromeda trade sector, sent out a few exploration ships, made some noise about wanting to be friends with everyone. Xyloth had read the briefing files on humans out of curiosity. They were from a small blue planet on the far edge of the Orion Arm, a world that seemed determined to kill them with its weather and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The humans had spent most of their history fighting each other over resources and ideologies, nearly destroying themselves with nuclear weapons and environmental collapse. They were violent and unpredictable, still learning how to live together as one species. Most established civilizations considered them primitive and dangerous, best left alone until they either grew up or destroyed themselves. But they were also close, relatively speaking. The human embassy was only 14 light-years away, while the nearest major fleet was 40. Xyloth made a decision that was probably foolish but felt right. He told Varric to include the human frequency in their broadcast. What did it matter? No one else was coming. Maybe the humans would at least record what happened, Tell others that the Varine had existed, had mattered, had tried to survive. The distress signal went out carrying everything the Varine could pack into it. Scientific data from 3,000 years of research, cultural archives with their greatest literature and art, medical records that could help other species cure diseases, mathematical formulas that unlocked secrets of the universe, and a simple message repeated in every language they knew, including the rough, blunt syllables of human English. We are dying. Please help, please remember us. Outside the station, the Krathax warships moved into final attack formation, their weapons powered up, glowing with lethal energy. Xyloth could see them through the observation window, massive dark shapes blotting out the stars. In minutes they would fire and the shields would collapse and the station would break apart like glass under a hammer. Everyone inside would die, their bodies frozen and scattered across the void, eventually pulled into the dying star to burn away to nothing. Xyloth gathered his crew around him. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would comfort them in their final moments. But what words existed for this? How did you tell young people that all their dreams and hopes were about to end? Because the galaxy was a cruel place that let monsters destroy the innocent. He opened his mouth and found he could say nothing at all. Instead, he just held them and they held each other and they waited together. The Krathax fired their first volley. The station's shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the impact, but everyone could see the power levels dropping fast. Another hit like that and they were done. Myra checked her console and reported that shields were down to 30%. The next attack would probably breach the hull. Emergency bulkheads would seal automatically, buying maybe a few more minutes for some sections, but the end result would be the same. Xyloth closed his eyes and thought about his home world, the crystal cities that grew from living rock, the singing forests where he had played as a child, the vast libraries that held the accumulated wisdom of his people. He would never see any of it again, but at least his last act had been to try to preserve it all in the distress signal, now racing across space at the speed of light, carrying the soul of his civilization to anyone who might listen. The Krathax weapons charged for the killing blow, and in the cold silence of space, nobody heard the Varine pray for a miracle they did not believe would come. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair on the bridge of the UHSF Valiant, reading reports about fuel consumption and supply manifests when the distress call came through. The bridge had been quiet, almost boring, with just the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional beep from a console. They were on routine patrol along the outer edge of human-controlled space, not expecting anything more exciting than maybe checking on a merchant vessel or investigating a sensor anomaly. Then the communications panel lit up like a Christmas tree, and Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes practically jumped out of her seat. The translation software took a moment to process the alien language, converting it into words that made sense to human ears. When it finished, every person on the bridge fell silent. They listened to the desperate plea from creatures they had never met, describing an attack by an empire they had never heard of, begging for help that they clearly did not expect to receive. The message included data packages with images and videos showing the Varine station, the attacking fleet, the families huddled in fear waiting to die. Lisa played it through twice to make sure they understood correctly. Jake had been a soldier before he became a starship captain. He fought in the Unification Wars back on Earth, a brutal conflict that lasted 15 years and killed almost 1 billion people before humanity finally got tired of killing itself and came together as one species. He had seen cities burn, watched friends die, pulled children from rubble that used to be schools. Those memories never left him, haunted his dreams most nights. When humanity built its first faster-than-light ships and offered him a command, he jumped at the chance, hoping the stars would be cleaner than Earth, that maybe out here things would be different. But the galaxy was just bigger, not better. The same violence existed, just spread across light years instead of continents. The same cruelty, the same indifference, the same strong preying on the weak. And now a distress call was asking if anyone cared enough to stop it. Jake stood up from his chair and walked to the main view screen, staring at the stars while his mind raced through calculations and consequences. Behind him, his bridge crew waited for orders, knowing that whatever he decided next would define them. Ben Carter, the navigation officer, broke the silence first. He was young, maybe 25, with brown hair and the kind of eager face that still believed in heroes. He ran the numbers and reported that they could reach the Varine station in 14 hours if they pushed the engines to maximum warp. But then he added the part that everyone was thinking: they were just one ship. The distress call indicated at least 20 enemy vessels. The Valiant was new and powerful, the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. But it was still just one ship against a fleet. Commander Nicole Price, Jake's first officer, voiced the concern that protocol demanded. She was older than most of the crew, a veteran diplomat who had helped negotiate Earth's entry into the galactic community. She understood politics and consequences in a way that soldiers like Jake sometimes did not. Getting involved in an alien conflict could start an interstellar incident. Humanity was new to the galaxy, still trying to figure out how everything worked, where the boundaries were, who was allied with whom. One wrong move could make powerful enemies, get Earth blockaded or attacked or worse. Jake listened to her concerns because they were valid and she was smart, and he trusted her judgment. But he also remembered something from his history classes back in school, a quote from an old philosopher whose name he could not quite recall. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. He had seen that truth proven over and over during the Unification Wars, watched as nations stood by while genocides happened, as politicians debated while children starved, as the powerful ignored the weak until it was too late to save anyone. He turned to face his crew and made his decision. They were going. He did not care about protocols or politics or making enemies. 300 people were about to die, and he had the power to help them, so he was going to help them. That was the whole point of having power in the first place. He called down to engineering and told Chief Martin Powell to give him every bit of speed the engines could produce. Martin was a miracle worker, who had somehow kept the Valiant running through 3 impossible situations already, and Jake knew he would find a way to squeeze out extra power now. Then Jake pressed the button for the ship-wide intercom, the one that let him talk to every crew member at once, from the pilots in the hangar bay to the technicians in the reactor room to the Marines in the barracks. His voice echoed through every corridor and cabin, telling them about the distress call, explaining what they were about to do. He did not sugarcoat it or pretend it would be easy. They had not been tested in real combat yet. All their training and drills were theory, not practice. They were probably outnumbered and outgunned. Some of them might die, but there were people out there who needed help, and the Valiant was going to give it to them. Throughout the ship, the crew responded. In the hangar bay, fighter pilots stopped their poker game and sprinted to their crafts, running pre-flight checks at double speed. In engineering, Martin and his team started pushing the fusion reactor beyond recommended limits, feeding more power to the warp drive than the designers had ever intended. In the medical bay, Dr. Charles Webb cleared the beds and prepped surgical equipment, knowing he would need it soon. In the armory, weapons officers loaded railgun ammunition and checked missile tubes. Everyone moved with purpose, with urgency, with the understanding that minutes might mean the difference between saving lives and arriving too late. Lisa sent a priority message back to Fleet Command on Earth, informing them of the situation and requesting immediate backup. The response came back within minutes, and it was not what Jake wanted to hear. Fleet Command acknowledged the distress call, but ordered the Valiant to wait for reinforcements before engaging. The nearest battle group was 40 hours away. By then, the Varine would be dead and frozen and scattered across space. Jake read the order twice, then deleted it from his console and told no one about it. He would face the consequences later, probably a court-martial, maybe the end of his career. But he would face those consequences knowing he tried to do the right thing. The Valiant's engines flared bright blue, brighter than they should have been, as Martin pushed them past their limits. The ship leaped forward into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind the safe patrol route and heading toward a battle that no one was sure they could win. In his ready room, Jake sat alone for a moment, looking at a picture of Earth on his desk. The blue planet seemed so small and fragile from space, a reminder of what they were really fighting for. Not territory or resources or political advantage, but the simple idea that people should help each other, that the strong should protect the weak, that when someone cried out in the darkness, someone should answer. He thought about the Varine waiting for death, probably not even hoping anymore that their distress call would reach anyone in time. He thought about his crew, good people who had joined the Space Force to explore and discover, not to fight and die. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons why smarter people than him would say this was a mistake. But then he thought about the alternative, about doing nothing, about living with the knowledge that he could have saved people and chose not to, because it was risky or complicated or inconvenient. Jake stood up and walked back to the bridge, where his crew waited at their stations with determination on their faces. They knew what they were flying into and they were ready. Lisa reported that she had picked up response messages from two other human ships, the USS Roosevelt and the HMS Churchill. Both captains had received the same orders to wait for reinforcements, and both had made the same decision to ignore those orders. They were pushing their engines hard to catch up, trying to reach the battle in time to help. Humanity might be new to the galaxy, might be small and inexperienced and probably foolish, but they were coming. The hours crawled by as the Valiant raced through the void. Jake did not sleep, could not sleep. Just paced the bridge and ran simulations and tried to figure out how to fight 20 ships with one. Nicole worked with the tactical team to identify the enemy command vessel, reasoning that if they could disable or destroy it, the rest of the fleet might falter. Ben plotted attack vectors and escape routes. Lisa kept trying to raise the Varine station, hoping to let them know that help was coming. But the distance was still too great for real-time communication. Finally, after 14 hours that felt like 14 years, the Valiant dropped out of warp at the edge of the Kepler system. The sensors immediately lit up with contacts, and the main view screen showed a scene from a nightmare. The Varine station was still there, but barely, its shields flickering and failing under constant bombardment. 22 Krathax warships surrounded it like wolves around wounded prey, their weapons glowing as they prepared another volley. Debris floated everywhere, pieces of station hull and destroyed defense satellites. Jake looked at the tactical display showing all the enemy ships, their sizes and weapons and formations. Any reasonable person would turn around and wait for backup. Any smart captain would recognize that the Krathax fleet had just begun another bombardment run when the Valiant appeared on their sensors like a ghost, materializing from nothing. Commander Xyloth saw it first on his damaged display screen, a single contact dropping out of warp right at the edge of the system, racing toward them at speeds that made his mathematician's mind boggle. The ship was smaller than the Krathax cruisers, but moved with a precision and purpose that spoke of advanced technology and skilled pilots. Its design was unfamiliar, all sharp angles and brutal efficiency, nothing like the elegant curves of Varine engineering or the organic shapes of most galactic species. Lieutenant Myra ran the identification through their database and came up with a match that made no sense. Human vessel, the computer reported. Probably their newest class of warship based on the energy signatures. But humans were newcomers, barely out of their own solar system, with maybe a handful of ships total. Why would they respond to a distress call from strangers? Why would they risk their precious few warships against an enemy that outnumbered them more than 20 to 1? It violated every principle of self-interest that governed galactic politics. Xyloth had no time to ponder the question because the human ship immediately opened fire. Its railguns, primitive kinetic weapons that most species had abandoned millennia ago in favor of energy beams, spat out slugs of metal moving at incredible speeds. The projectiles crossed the distance between the Valiant and the nearest Krathax destroyer in seconds, punching through shields that were designed to deflect energy weapons, but not solid matter traveling at a fraction of light speed. The destroyer's hull ruptured in 3 places, atmosphere venting into space, internal explosions rippling through its structure. Within 30 seconds of entering the battle, the humans had crippled an enemy ship. Then the Valiant's hangar bays opened and fighters poured out, dozens of small craft that darted between the larger vessels like insects harassing predators. The Krathax had never seen anything like them. Most galactic militaries used automated drones or long-range missiles, not piloted strike craft. It seemed wasteful and dangerous to put living beings in such fragile vessels, but the human pilots flew with a reckless aggression that took the Krathax completely by surprise, weaving through defensive fire, launching missiles at close range, targeting weak points in the alien armor with a precision that suggested either incredible skill or really good tactical computers. Jake watched the tactical display as his fighters engaged the enemy fleet, his hands gripping the armrests of his command chair hard enough to hurt. 2 of his pilots, Lieutenant Amy Chen and Captain Steve Price, led their squadron straight at a Krathax heavy cruiser, dodging energy beams that turned space around them into a deadly light show. Their missiles streaked toward the cruiser's engine section, exploiting a vulnerability that Nicole had identified in the pre-battle analysis. The warheads detonated in sequence, each explosion weakening the shields until the final missile punched through and struck the reactor housing. The cruiser's engines died, leaving it drifting and helpless, but the Krathax were not caught flat-footed for long. Their initial surprise gave way to cold efficiency, as they redirected half their fleet to deal with the human threat. Energy beams lanced across space, tracking the fast-moving fighters with increasing accuracy. Jake watched in horror as one beam caught Lieutenant Danny Foster's fighter dead center, the small craft vaporizing in an instant, not even leaving debris. Another pilot, Sarah Mitchell, took a glancing hit that sent her spinning out of control before she could eject. Her fighter crashed into a Krathax destroyer's shield and exploded, a brief flash of light marking the end of a life. The Valiant itself became the focus of 3 heavy cruisers that recognized it as the command ship. They poured fire into its shields with a ferocity that made the entire vessel shake. Greg Mason, the tactical officer, called out damage reports in a voice that stayed steady, despite the fear everyone felt. Shields at 60% and dropping fast. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 12 where energy beams had punched through weak points. Casualties reported in engineering where an overload had killed 2 technicians and injured 5 more. Fire suppression systems working overtime in 3 sections. Jake refused to retreat. They had come too far, lost too much already, and the Varine station was still hanging by a thread. He ordered all forward weapons to target the nearest heavy cruiser, concentrating fire on a single point. The Valiant's main cannon, a massive electromagnetic accelerator that ran almost the entire length of the ship, began charging up. It took 30 seconds to reach full power, 30 seconds during which the Krathax pounded them relentlessly, and the shield strength dropped to 40%. When the main cannon fired, it lit up the darkness like a miniature sun being born. The energy bolt crossed the distance in less than a heartbeat and struck the Krathax cruiser's shields with enough force to overload them instantly. The beam continued through the now unprotected hull, carving a molten canyon from bow to stern, cutting through armor and deck plates and crew quarters and reactor chambers. The cruiser came apart in 2 pieces that drifted slowly away from each other, secondary explosions rippling through both halves, atmosphere and debris and bodies spilling into the void. But killing one ship cost them dearly. While the main cannon recharged, the other 2 cruisers concentrated their fire on the Valiant's weakened shields. The barriers collapsed entirely on the port side, and energy beams raked across the hull, cutting deep into the superstructure. Dr. Webb reported casualties flooding into medical bay faster than he could treat them. Martin called from engineering to say that they had lost 2 of the 4 main reactors and the warp drive was offline. They could still fight, but they could not run. Trapped in a battle they were losing by the numbers. Then salvation arrived in the form of 2 new warp signatures. The USS Roosevelt and the HMS Churchill dropped into normal space, with weapons already hot and targeting solutions locked. The Roosevelt, commanded by Captain George Palmer, immediately engaged the cruisers attacking the Valiant, while the Churchill under Captain Helen Stone swept through the outer edge of the Krathax formation, her fighters adding to the chaos. The sudden appearance of reinforcements shocked the Krathax again, making them break formation and attempt to regroup. Jake did not give them the chance. He ordered the Valiant to push forward despite the damage, to press the attack while the enemy was confused. Nicole coordinated with the other 2 captains, and together they executed a maneuver that Jake had learned during the Unification Wars, a human tactic that no alien species had ever encountered. They called it the hammer and anvil. The Valiant and Roosevelt became the anvil, holding position and pouring fire into the Krathax fleet. The Churchill became the hammer, sweeping around the enemy's flank and hitting them from behind, catching them between 2 fires with nowhere to run. The battle turned into a brutal slugging match. The humans were outnumbered, but they fought with a coordination and ferocity that the Krathax were not prepared for. Human ships worked together, covering each other's weaknesses, concentrating fire to punch through shields, targeting engines and weapons and command centers with ruthless efficiency. The Krathax fought as individuals, each captain making their own decisions. No overall strategy beyond overwhelming the enemy with numbers. It might have worked against most species, but humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war, learning bitter lessons written in blood across countless battlefields. Slowly, painfully, the tide shifted. A Krathax destroyer broke apart under combined fire from two human ships. A heavy cruiser lost its shields and tried to retreat, only to have its engines destroyed by a fighter squadron. Another cruiser took a direct hit from the Churchill's main cannon and went dark, power failing, crew evacuating in escape pods. The Krathax fleet, which had seemed so unstoppable an hour ago, began to fall apart. The turning point came when Jake identified the enemy flagship, a massive battleship that had been hanging back and coordinating the attack. He gambled everything on one desperate maneuver, ordering the Valiant to charge directly at it while the Roosevelt and Churchill provided covering fire. It was insane and stupid and exactly the kind of unpredictable move that enemies who relied on logic and calculation could not anticipate. The Valiant's remaining shields barely held as it raced through a storm of enemy fire, taking hits that would have destroyed a lesser vessel, closing the distance until they were almost on top of the Krathax flagship. Then Jake fired everything. Railguns and missiles and the main cannon all at once, point-blank range, more firepower than any sane captain would unleash so close to a target because the explosion could catch them too. The Krathax flagship's shields collapsed instantly under the onslaught. The hull cracked open like an eggshell. Internal explosions chained through the ship as reactor containment failed. The flagship came apart in a fireball that briefly outshone the dying star, and the shockwave caught the Valiant and sent it tumbling. But they survived. With their command ship destroyed and more than half their fleet crippled or dead, the remaining Krathax vessels broke and ran, jumping to warp in random directions, abandoning their wounded and their mission and any pretense of military discipline. The transporter beam released Jake Morrison on the Varine Station's main docking bay, in a shimmer of blue light that still made his stomach feel weird, even after months of using the technology. Commander Nicole Price materialized beside him along with 4 security personnel, all of them wearing dress uniforms instead of combat gear, because this was supposed to be diplomacy, not war. The artificial gravity felt lighter than Earth standard, making each step bouncy and strange like walking on a trampoline. The air tasted metallic and thin, requiring their oxygen supplements to kick in. Around them, the architecture curved and flowed in ways that human engineers would never design, all bioluminescent panels and organic shapes that seemed grown rather than built. A delegation of Varine waited near the airlock, and Jake got his first real look at the species he had just risked everything to save. They were taller than humans, maybe 7 feet on average, with skin that shifted between shades of blue and purple like mood rings. Their faces were elongated with large eyes that took up almost a third of their heads, eyes that currently reflected something the cultural briefing had described as profound emotion. They had 3 fingers on each hand, and moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy by comparison. Everything about them screamed peaceful, evolved, civilized, the opposite of the brutal Krathax or the aggressive humans. Commander Xyloth stepped forward, and Jake could see the stress of the last hours written in every line of his body. The Varine commander's skin was still pale, not yet recovered from the terror of near death. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had been injured and was not sure if the pain would return. When he spoke, his voice came out musical and soft, translated into English by the universal device everyone wore. He thanked Jake for saving them, but his words carried an undertone of confusion that went deeper than simple gratitude. Jake extended his hand in the human greeting, and Xyloth hesitantly took it, clearly having studied human customs in preparation for this meeting. The handshake felt awkward between species with different numbers of fingers, but the gesture itself transcended biology. It was contact, acknowledgement, a physical connection between 2 beings who had every reason to trust each other now. Jake introduced himself properly, giving his rank and ship and homeworld, the formal stuff that diplomats cared about, but Xyloth did not want formality. He wanted answers. He asked the question again, the same one he had asked over the communication channel, but this time with more desperation and need. Why did you come? Why did you risk your ships, your lives, your people for strangers you had never met? The Varine had nothing to offer in return, no technology advanced enough to interest humans, no resources rare enough to justify the cost, no political power to make them valuable allies. By every calculation that governed galactic politics, helping them made no sense. Jake smiled, the kind of sad smile that soldiers wore when they had seen too much death but still tried to do good. He explained the philosophy that had guided his decision, using words that felt inadequate but were all he had. Humans had a saying about evil triumphing when good people did nothing. They had learned through bitter experience that standing aside and letting bad things happen was the same as causing them yourself. When you had the power to help and chose not to use it, you became part of the problem. So when they heard the distress call, when they knew people were dying, the choice became simple even if the execution was dangerous. Xyloth's skin flickered through several colors that the translator struggled to interpret, settling on something between amazement and sorrow. He explained that in all his years studying galactic civilizations, reading their histories and philosophies and cultural texts, he had never encountered such thinking. The galaxy operated on clear principles of self-interest. The Krathax took because they were strong and wanted more. The Helian Empire traded because profit motivated every decision. The Sindarin Collective isolated themselves because they preferred safety over engagement. Every species acted according to calculated advantage, weighing costs against benefits, making rational choices based on outcomes. But humans apparently operated on a different calculation entirely. They acted based on principles rather than profits, on morality rather than mathematics. They made decisions that put them at risk for abstract concepts like justice and compassion. It was either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid, and Xyloth admitted he was not sure which. Maybe it was both. Maybe nobility and stupidity were closer than most species wanted to admit. Over the next hours, as human repair crews worked alongside Vereen engineers to stabilize the damaged station, Jake learned the full scope of the situation they had stumbled into. The Krathax Empire had been expanding for decades, moving through the outer regions of the galaxy like a plague. They conquered or destroyed everything in their path, taking worlds, enslaving populations, consuming resources. Conservative estimates suggested they had wiped out at least 15 species completely and enslaved dozens more. The established galactic powers knew about it, had known for years and done essentially nothing. The Galactic Council held meetings and debates, issued statements of concern, occasionally imposed sanctions that the Krathax ignored. But nobody sent fleets. Nobody intervened militarily. Nobody put their own people at risk to save strangers. The Council operated on a principle of non-interference, a policy that sounded noble but in practice meant letting genocide happen as long as it stayed far enough away from major powers. Xyloth walked Jake through the damaged research levels, showing him what the Vereen had been working on before the attack interrupted everything. They studied stellar collapse, trying to understand how stars died and what that meant for the long-term survival of civilization. They researched quantum entanglement, hoping to develop communication that worked faster than light. They mapped dark matter, cataloged exoplanets, analyzed alien biochemistry, all the work of a species that chose knowledge over conquest, questions over answers, understanding over exploitation. Nicole, walking beside them, asked the question that Jake had been thinking. If the galaxy knew about the Krathax, if everyone understood the threat, why did they allow it to continue? Why not form a coalition and stop them? Surely dozens of species working together could defeat one aggressive empire. The math seemed simple enough. Xyloth's response revealed a truth about galactic politics that made Jake's stomach turn. The major powers did not care about species, like the Vereen, because they were small and weak and offered nothing strategic. Saving them would cost resources and lives with no tangible return. It might even start a larger war if the Krathax decided to retaliate against whoever interfered. Better to let the outer regions burn, to sacrifice the small civilizations as a buffer, keeping the major powers safe. It was cold and logical and utterly practical from a certain perspective. It was also morally bankrupt in ways that made Jake want to punch something. He asked Xyloth if any species had tried to help, if anyone else had answered distress calls or stood up to the Krathax. The Vereen commander's skin turned a dark blue that meant deep sadness. A few had tried, he admitted. Small coalitions of minor species, idealists who thought they could make a difference. The Krathax had destroyed them all, and the major powers had watched it happen, then used the defeats as examples of why intervention was foolish. The galaxy had learned to accept atrocity as inevitable, to treat genocide as someone else's problem, until humans arrived, until 3 ships answered a call that everyone else ignored, until Jake Morrison decided that being new and weak and outnumbered was not an excuse for doing nothing. Xyloth turned to face Jake directly, his large eyes reflecting the human captain's image. He said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. You are either going to change everything, or you are going to get yourselves killed trying. I am not sure which possibility frightens me more. Jake looked around at the damaged station, at the Vereen scientists slowly coming out of hiding, at the children who had expected to die and now had a future. He thought about the 47 human crew members who would never go home, who had died so these aliens could live. He wondered if it was worth it, if the cost was too high, if he had made the right choice. Then he saw a Vereen child, maybe equivalent to a human 10-year-old, peeking around a corner at the strange aliens who had saved her. She was holding a stuffed toy that looked like nothing from Earth, but served the same universal purpose of comfort. When she caught Jake looking, she did not run. She smiled, a gesture that apparently transcended species, and waved. Jake waved back, and in that moment he knew. The cost was worth it. 47 lives to save 300, to give a child a future, to prove that someone in this cold galaxy still cared about doing the right thing. Math said it was a good trade. Morality said it was the only trade. He turned back to Xyloth and answered the unspoken question. Maybe they would change everything, or maybe they would die trying. Either way, they were not going to stop. Humanity had not clawed its way up from the atomic age, just to become another species that looked away when people screamed for help. Nicole pulled up a star map on her portable display, showing the regions where the Krathax operated. It was a depressing amount of space, hundreds of systi. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler, Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, feeling very small and very alone. The chamber was massive beyond human comprehension, a sphere maybe 2 miles across with delegates from 53 species arranged on platforms that floated in precise orbital patterns. Gravity manipulation tech kept everyone oriented toward the center, where Jake stood on a circular platform maybe 30 feet wide. Above and below and all around him, alien eyes watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to complete indifference. The Council had summoned him to explain humanity's actions in the Kepler sector. The Krathax Empire, showing remarkable nerve for genocidal conquerors, had filed a formal complaint claiming that humans violated their sovereign right to expand their borders and defend their interests. Several council members had supported the complaint, not because they liked the Krathax, but because they feared what humanity's intervention might mean for the carefully balanced system of non-interference. That kept the galactic peace. Jake wore his full dress, uniform with all the medals and ribbons that 40 years of service had earned him. He wanted to look professional and respectable, to show that humans could play by the rules of civilized discourse. But he had also brought something else, a data chip containing every distress call that had gone unanswered in the last decade. Every genocide that the Council had debated while people died, every species that had vanished because nobody cared enough to help. Xyloth had compiled it for him, a devastating record of institutional failure that Jake intended to shove in their faces. The Council leader, an ancient Tellurian named Elderstone Mind who had been alive longer than human civilization, called the session to order. Her species resembled living rocks, silicon-based life that thought in geological timescales and rarely hurried for anything. She spoke slowly, each word carefully chosen, asking Jake to explain why humanity felt entitled to interfere in conflicts that did not concern them, to ignore established protocols, to risk destabilizing the delicate balance that prevented galaxy-wide war. Jake took a deep breath and began. He started with simple facts, keeping his voice calm and professional, even though anger burned in his gut. Humanity received a distress call from the Vereen research station. The station was under attack by Krathax forces. 300 civilians faced imminent death. Human ships were close enough to respond. They responded. He made it sound routine, boring even, just following basic emergency procedures that any civilized species should have. But the Helian ambassador, a crystalline being that communicated through patterns of light, was not satisfied with that explanation. The translator rendered its flashing as accusations. Humans presumed to lecture civilizations that had existed for millennia, showed arrogance by ignoring council authority, demonstrated dangerous unpredictability that threatened the established order. Other delegates chimed in with similar concerns, creating a chorus of complaint that echoed through the chamber. Jake let them talk. Let them voice their objections and fears. Let them reveal exactly what they were really worried about. They were not concerned about the Krathax or the Vereen or any principles of justice. They were scared that humanity's actions might set a precedent, might create expectations, might force them to actually do something next time genocide happened. They wanted to maintain a system where they could claim moral superiority through strongly worded statements, while never risking anything real. When the chamber finally quieted, Jake responded, and he did not bother with diplomatic language. He told them the truth in words that cut like knives. Humanity was young and inexperienced, barely out of their own solar system, still figuring out how faster-than-light travel worked. But they had just come from a planet where they spent thousands of years killing each other over every stupid reason imaginable. Resources, religion, territory, ideology, skin color. They had fought wars over all of it. They nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times with nuclear weapons and biological plagues and environmental collapse. So humans understood something that these ancient civilizations seemed to have forgotten. They knew what happened when aggressive powers were left unchecked, because they had been those aggressive powers. They knew what it looked like when good people stood aside and did nothing, because they had been those good people standing aside. They knew the cost of non-interference because they had paid it over and over in rivers of blood and mountains of bodies. And they had finally, painfully learned that sometimes the only way to stop evil was to stand up and fight it, regardless of cost or consequences. Jake activated the holographic display, and images filled the center of the chamber. Varine families huddling in fear as Krathak's warships closed in, the research station's shields failing under bombardment, children crying, scientists frantically trying to save their life's work, elderly Varine recording goodbye messages to relatives they would never see again. Then he showed the arrival of human ships, the desperate battle, the moment when hope returned. He asked a simple question that none of them wanted to answer. When the Varine sent their distress call, broadcasting on every frequency, begging for help, where was the Galactic Council? Where were the ancient and powerful civilizations that claimed to represent order and justice? Where were the fleets that could have easily stopped the Krathaks? Why did 3 primitive human ships have to travel 14 hours at maximum speed to save lives that everyone else deemed not worth saving? The Cinderin delegate, a floating jellyfish-like creature made of metallic strands, pulsed with displeasure. It argued that humans could not simply decide to enforce their morality across the galaxy, that the chaos such vigilantism would create would be worse than the problems it solved. Other species had tried similar crusades in the past, it reminded everyone, and the results had been catastrophic wars that killed billions. The system of non-interference had evolved specifically to prevent such conflicts. Jake agreed with part of that, admitted that humans did not have all the answers, acknowledged that their morality might not be universal, but then he asked another question that made the delegates uncomfortable. How many species had to die before the system of non-interference itself became immoral? At what point did preventing war become the same as enabling genocide? When did maintaining balance become indistinguishable from being complicit in atrocity? He brought up the data that Xyloth had compiled, projecting it for everyone to see. 15 species completely destroyed in the last decade. 47 civilizations enslaved or displaced, over 3 billion individuals killed or missing. All of it documented, reported, brought before the council. All of it debated endlessly while nothing concrete was done. The council issued statements of concern, imposed economic sanctions that the Krathaks ignored, held emergency sessions that produced no emergency actions. Jake's voice grew harder as he continued. The council had rules about non-interference, about respecting sovereignty, about avoiding destabilizing conflicts. But those rules protected predators and abandoned prey. Those rules made genocide convenient to ignore. Those rules let good people sleep at night while telling themselves they were maintaining peace, when really they were just maintaining their own comfort and safety. Then Jake made humanity's position clear, speaking words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Earth was drawing a line. Humans would protect those who could not protect themselves. They would answer distress calls regardless of political consequences. They would not allow genocide in systems they could reach, simply because intervention was inconvenient or unprofitable. If that made them pariahs, troublemakers, enemies of the established order, so be it. They would rather be right and isolated than wrong and accepted. The chamber erupted. Dozens of species argued simultaneously, their translation devices struggling to keep up. Some delegates expressed outrage at human presumption. Others worried about the precedent being set. A few voiced quiet agreement but seemed afraid to say so too loudly. The noise became overwhelming. a wall of sound and light and chemical signals that represented complete breakdown of order. Elder Stonemind let it continue for several minutes before calling for silence with a gesture that carried weight beyond its physical motion. She looked at Jake with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall, that had witnessed every variation of folly and wisdom that sentient beings could produce. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of ages, and everyone listened. She told Jake that he had spoken boldly, perhaps too boldly for such a young species. But she also acknowledged that his words contained uncomfortable truths that the Council had been avoiding. The system of non-interference had indeed failed the Vereen and countless others. The major powers had become comfortable, complacent, willing to sacrifice the weak to avoid risking the strong. That was not the purpose for which the Council had been created millennia ago. But she also warned Jake about the consequences of his position. If humanity insisted on this path, they would make powerful enemies beyond just the Krathax. There were other expansionist empires, other predatory species who would see human interference as a threat to their interests. Some council members might even support actions against humanity to preserve the status quo.